She said it with the kind of smooth conviction you can only get from wine and self-righteousness. Her elbow rested on the arm of the chair like it belonged to a throne, the oversized glass tilted just enough to catch the light. "Marriage is just a cage," she said, watching me, gauging me. "I'm not meant to live my whole life in someone else's structure." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have thoughts. God, I had thoughts. But because I was watching something else. Her tone. Her posture. The subtle edge in her voice. Like this wasn't the first time she'd rehearsed a line. Maybe not even the first time she'd delivered it. I looked around our home. The hardwood floors I installed myself. The kitchen we argued over for months before settling on those ridiculous matte black fixtures she said were architectural. The mortgage payment that came from one account. Mine. She said it was a cage. But I saw nothing holding her there except her own convenience. "I guess we want different things," I said finally. She just sipped her wine like it was some kind of triumph. Like saying the line out loud gave her permission to believe it. There was no anger in me at that moment, just a strange, detached sort of clarity. The kind you get when someone shows you their real face, and you realize you've already started letting go. So I left the door unlocked that night, just in case she meant it. She didn't walk out. But I think that was the moment I began to. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She leaned over the island, scrolling her phone, asking if I wanted oat milk added to the grocery list. Her tone was light, domestic, familiar. I answered as I always did, kept my face neutral, and opened the Notes app on my phone to add a few items of my own. I didn't expect what I saw. The list wasn't mine. It wasn't even one of the shared lists we used for groceries or errands. But it was there, synced to our account, just created minutes before. It was titled, simply, Exit Plan. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Something she saw online and saved by accident. But then I read it. Cancel joint card. Talk to Josh. Therapy framing. Emotional misalignment. Airbnb month-to-month backup. Gather statements. My fingers tightened around the phone. I stared at it for a full minute before quietly locking the screen and slipping it into my pocket. I didn't say a word. She was still scrolling, sipping coffee, humming along to something on her feed. I think that moment might have been the first time I saw her clearly. Not the woman I married, but the woman she'd become while I wasn't looking. Or maybe she was always there, just dressed better and less honest. I went upstairs and opened my laptop. Started a new spreadsheet. Just a blank file. But I gave it a title I knew I wouldn't forget. Reality check. I didn't need to yell or accuse. I didn't even feel anger. Just the quiet click of emotional distance falling into place. I wasn't going to wait to be ambushed. I wasn't going to fight to keep someone who was already halfway out the door. But I also wasn't about to be blindsided and stripped on her way out. She thought marriage was a cage? Fine. I was done feeding the bird. I watched her more carefully after that morning. Not like a man watching his wife, but like an analyst observing a shifting variable. She didn't act nervous or deceptive. That's what struck me most, how practiced she was at being normal. She hummed while loading the dishwasher, texted me casually during work hours, suggested we try a new Mediterranean place over the weekend. All the while, her exit plan sat silently in the cloud between our phones like a blueprint she assumed I'd never read. The plan wasn't even detailed. That's what made it dangerous. It was a mood more than a method. A passive escape route dressed in self-help jargon and plausible deniability. Talk to Josh, lawyer. Not. File paperwork. Emotional misalignment. Not. I'm already done. She was crafting the narrative before making a move, but I'd already started building my own. That week, I reviewed every joint account, password, asset list. I started transferring autopays out of our shared credit card. Quietly. Methodically. No drama. I knew she'd notice eventually, but I didn't care. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was preparing. What became clearer with each passing day was that her dissatisfaction hadn't started overnight. This had been growing, like mold behind the walls. She'd been detaching emotionally, financially, physically, but still clinging to the lifestyle I maintained. The dinners out, the Pilates membership, the mortgage in her name. For equity optics. Despite me paying every dime, she wasn't trapped. She was perched, benefiting from the view without building the nest. Then came couples therapy. She booked the sessions herself, pitched them as a way to realign. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I wanted to hear the script she was rehearsing. I just feel like I'm not fully seen, she told the therapist during our second session. Her voice trembled slightly, carefully modulated. Like, I'm living someone else's version of success. I need room to figure out what I want. I watched the therapist nod, pen moving gently across her notepad. And what does that room look like? I asked softly. I wasn't being sarcastic. I genuinely wanted to know how she'd frame it. Well, she began, glancing at the therapist. Maybe some time apart. A trial separation. Nothing dramatic. Just space for both of us to explore what's next. It was impressive, really. The way she made retreat sound like growth. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. But inside I filed it under a different label, stage distancing. She wanted to detach without looking like the one who walked out. To keep the upper hand in narrative and legal framing. What she didn't know was that I'd already spoken with my own attorney. Quietly. No threats, no filing, just an understanding of what was mine, what was hers, and what wouldn't survive a courtroom exaggeration. That night, as she FaceTimed someone from the patio, claiming it was a cousin, I reviewed an old email from our financial advisor. One line stood out more than ever. Remember, ownership matters more than optics. She was playing optics. I was preparing ownership. And the bird? She was getting ready to fly without realizing I'd already locked the branch she was perched on. 3 nights a week, she stopped sleeping at home. She claimed she was house-sitting for a friend whose father had hip surgery, someone I'd never met, whose name shifted each time she mentioned it. I didn't argue. I just nodded, kissed her on the cheek when she left, and made sure to note the time, the location, and the outfit she packed. She never asked why I stopped texting goodnight. In therapy, she framed it as a logistical coincidence. I want to be present at home, but I also have obligations. I'm helping a friend. The therapist tilted her head slightly, interested. I said nothing. Silence had become my favorite tool. It made her fill the space. She talked more when I didn't interrupt. She explained herself more. Over-justified. That's how liars behave. I wasn't playing detective. I was building a case. Quietly. Strategically. Every lie she told with a soft smile just gave me more clarity. Every story that didn't quite add up became a data point. And the more she tried to soften the edges, the clearer the shape of her plan became. She told her yoga group I was emotionally limiting. I found that out through a mutual acquaintance, a friend of hers who hadn't fully chosen sides yet. Honestly, she makes it sound like you're controlling, the friend told me over coffee one afternoon. Like you don't support her dreams or independence. I thanked her, kept my expression neutral, and paid for both drinks. Then I went home and checked the notes app again. The exit plan file had new additions: independent bank account, speak to therapist emotional misalignment, draft letter Josh? I scrolled through it slowly, carefully. She hadn't noticed the file was still visible on our shared iCloud account. Or maybe she thought I wasn't clever enough to find it. Either way, it was arrogance disguised as empowerment. She was building a narrative, not just to leave, but to justify leaving on her terms. And worse, to lay claim to what I'd built. The business I started before we married. The property purchased in my name, but shared emotionally. She'd contributed nothing tangible, but was preparing to argue that her emotional labor somehow translated into ownership. That's when I knew. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated financial framing. She wanted to exit clean, profitable, and guilt-free. To shift the accountability onto me in any formal setting and walk away with her freedom fully funded. I started documenting everything. Shared bills, email chains, mortgage payments, even screenshots of the Notes app. I uploaded everything to a secure folder only my attorney could access. Quiet, thorough, controlled. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I told her she could take the spare room for a while, if she needed space. She looked surprised, relieved even. I just need to figure out what I want, she said, touching my hand. I smiled gently, as if I still believed her. Take all the time you need. She had no idea I'd already started closing the financial doors behind her, quietly, one hinge at a time. I was in the middle of a call with my financial advisor, Brian, when he paused mid-sentence. There's something I should flag for you, he said carefully. He wasn't the dramatic type. We'd worked together for years, through both lean quarters and unexpected windfalls. He only used that tone when something felt off. Go ahead, I said, my voice flat. She reached out last week, asking about your equity in the firm. Wanted to know how it's structured. Whether you'd ever signed any transfer documents. My grip tightened on the phone. She said she was exploring clarity in case of marital recalibration, he added, with just enough emphasis to show he didn't buy a word of it. I didn't speak for a few seconds. The office was quiet around me. Just the hum of the HVAC system and the soft clack of my assistant's keyboard in the outer room. She's not listed anywhere, I said finally. The operating agreement is airtight. She's never had ownership. I know. I checked. But she asked if emotional contribution could be considered stakeholding. That did it. She wasn't just planning to leave. She was preparing to rewrite the history of our marriage to frame herself as an emotional co-founder. To argue that she had a right to a portion of what I built, because she supported me through late nights and strategy calls, because she sat across from me at dinner while I stared at spreadsheets, as if presence equaled partnership. Brian sighed softly. I'm flagging this confidentially. I didn't give her any details, but you should know, she's testing the waters. I thanked him and hung up. That night, I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car outside the house, engine off, watching the upstairs light flicker as she moved from room to room. Probably preparing another stay at the mystery friend's place. Maybe FaceTiming Josh, her legal advisor. Or maybe just lying on the bed I paid for, on the mattress she once said. Felt like safety. It didn't anymore. Safety was gone. Replaced by strategy. She'd stopped contributing long ago, emotionally, financially. But she hadn't stopped benefiting. She kept the car, the luxury gym, the home office she rarely used but insisted she needed to feel empowered. She wasn't trapped. She was siphoning freedom while calling it survival. When I walked inside, she was in the kitchen, barefoot, humming something soft while roasting vegetables. Hey, I thought you had yoga tonight, I said. Cancelled, she replied. Didn't feel up to it. I nodded and opened the fridge. The normalcy felt staged, like a rehearsed domestic scene from a play either of us believed in anymore. I thought about confronting her right then. But no. She was building a case. I needed to build mine better. I kept my voice steady. I'll be working late tomorrow. There's a board meeting. She smiled without looking at me. Okay. Don't burn out. I watched her stir something on the stove. Thought about the irony of that comment. How many years I'd spent burning out while she curated wellness and detachment. And now, she wanted to walk away not just clean, but compensated. I didn't stop her. I just started working faster. Locking in my accounts. Notifying my firm to prepare language affirming sole ownership. Preparing the documents I'd soon place on the kitchen counter, next to the wine glass she'd cradle while telling me she never meant to hurt me. She called it a cage. But she was the one trying to steal the key. The following Monday, she brought up separation again. Not over dinner, not during therapy, just casually, over morning coffee like she was proposing a weekend getaway. I think some structured distance might help us reconnect better, she said, spooning oat milk into her mug. If we're not clinging so tightly to the roles we've always had, maybe we'll see each other more clearly. She wore that same neutral expression she used when asking waiters to redo her salad. Polite, measured, vaguely disappointed. But this wasn't disappointment. It was choreography. She was laying the emotional groundwork to justify the split. Staged concern. Practiced ambiguity. I nodded. That's fair. She looked surprised. Maybe she expected resistance. A fight to validate her performance. Instead, I sipped my coffee and said, I'll draw up some notes. Timeline. Logistics. Let's make it clean. Her smile faltered. She covered it by looking at her phone. That was the first crack in her script. She wanted control of the narrative, that she was brave enough to walk away from comfort to find her truth. But what she didn't count on was me handing her the reins, then calmly stepping off the stage before she finished her monologue. That day, I met with my attorney again. We finalized a separation agreement that clarified ownership, financial responsibility, and asset protection. Her name wasn't on the business. She never contributed financially to the property. Her lifestyle had been funded, not earned. Legally, it was ironclad. The document included one paragraph that would end her angle before it started. This separation acknowledges that all shared lifestyle experiences were supported by my name, without expectation of financial contribution, and without establishing co-ownership in business or property interests. It wasn't cold. It was precise. A clean unlock. That night, she came home late again. Claimed she was at a group dinner for wellness entrepreneurs. I nodded, watching her set down a bag that didn't belong to her usual rotation. She changed her story halfway through explaining it. First it was dinner. Then it was a friend's pitch meeting. Then it was just decompressing. I didn't argue. I just handed her a small envelope. What's this? She asked, blinking. Clarity, I said. The space you asked for? All outlined. Legally sound, fair but firm. She opened it on the kitchen counter. Inside were the documents, a financial breakdown, and a short letter. You said marriage was a cage. I won't argue that. If this house was ever a prison, you had the only key. Consider this a clean unlock. She stood there, reading, wine glass untouched. No panic, just silence. She looked up slowly. You didn't even ask me what I wanted. I didn't need to, I said. You left the exit plan on the cloud. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, more in calculation than guilt. That told me everything. She hadn't been careless. She thought I was oblivious. And when it turned out I wasn't, she realized the only cage was the one she built by underestimating me. After I handed her the envelope, she didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't even deny it. She just stood there, silent, as if waiting for a cue I no longer planned to give her. The play was over. The lights were down. All that remained was the echo of her own choices. That night, she didn't sleep in the spare room. She left, said she. Needed to think. Didn't pack much, just enough to suggest she'd planned this variation of the story too. A few dresses, one pair of shoes, her skincare bag. She moved with theatrical restraint, like she was still being watched, judged, recorded in some legal narrative she'd built in her head. I didn't stop her. The next few days passed quietly. She didn't text. I didn't reach out. Her silence wasn't surprising. It was strategic retreat, waiting to see how hard I'd chase. How much of the narrative I'd let her control. Then, a call from Brian. She's attempting to list your business as a marital asset, he said bluntly. Submitted a draft through a new attorney. Claims indirect contribution through shared resources and lifestyle alignment, so she'd switch legal counsel. Found someone willing to test boundaries, and she was pushing the narrative harder now, banking on ambiguity to do the heavy lifting. What she didn't know was that my counsel had already pre-registered every financial milestone, time-stamped and verified. We had receipts for every account, every investment, every wire transfer, most made months, even years before we married. And we had the kicker, a saved PDF export of her exit plan, note, dated and synced, her own digital footprint, establishing intent before mutual separation was ever discussed. When her new lawyer saw the full package, including her contradictory timeline, false equity claim, and our asset protection clause, they backed off immediately. My attorney called it a tactical retreat disguised as a scheduling delay. She lost her legal momentum that week. 2 weeks later, I heard she moved in with a friend. Not the wellness entrepreneur or the yoga circle, someone quieter. A friend from college, living alone in a modest apartment across town. No more glossy Instagram stories. No more independent woman branding. She was offline, low profile, recalibrating. And the mutuals? They started fading too. Not out of anger, just fatigue. Our social circle had grown tired of her careful reframings, the constant narrative shifts, the vague claims she floated in the form of concerns. Once I didn't play villain, her story collapsed. No one rallied. No one condemned me. They just stopped calling her back. I didn't feel vindicated, just tired, not of her, but of what I'd allowed myself to carry for too long. The weight of holding up a life for two people, one of whom was already packing parachutes while I paid the rent on the plane. The house was quieter now, still mine, still standing, and for the first time in a while, it didn't feel like a performance space. Just a home, even without her in it. By the third week, I stopped checking her social media. Not out of discipline, just disinterest. The filters were gone. The aesthetic posts, the inspirational quotes, the soft glow selfies taken at just the right angle in cafes I paid for. They dried up. In their place, a few quiet reposts, articles about rediscovering self-worth, and navigating relational transitions. She was trying to pivot into being her own audience now, narrating the spin in real time. I knew what she was really doing, treading water. The legal route had closed in on her faster than expected. Her original legal contact backed out the day after receiving our financial documentation. Her second faded after reviewing her claims and timeline inconsistencies. No one wanted to build a case on sand. The money dried up next. She'd opened a separate account using our joint credit leverage, a subtle but traceable move. My attorney caught it during our asset review. We didn't block it. We let it sit there. A low balance. No new deposits. Just a frozen attempt at liquidity. I didn't pursue her for it. There was no need. She'd leveraged the illusion of entitlement, not actual equity. And illusions don't cash out. By then, she'd stopped staying with a friend. I heard she was bouncing between sublets, 1-month rentals, week-to-week agreements. The irony wasn't lost on me. She left what she called the cage, only to find herself without shelter. But I didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. I wasn't keeping score. I was keeping peace. Her name was still technically on the mail slot at our house. I left it there for a while. It didn't matter. She wasn't coming back. Not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't walk into a space she no longer controlled. The last item in the exit plan note had been, reclaim independence, define new chapter. I kept rereading that line. Not because I resented it, but because it revealed something fundamental. She never defined her freedom by building something of her own. She defined it by stepping out of what I built. That was the flaw in her logic, and her strategy. You can't exit a system you never contributed to and expect to rewrite its foundation. And I finally stopped checking the Notes app. The file was still there, frozen in digital amber, a monument to the lie she thought she could curate. But I no longer needed proof. I had peace. And that was worth more than any courtroom win or social vindication. The official signing took place on a Tuesday. No legal setting, no confrontation. Just 2 separate offices, 2 sets of pens, and a courier service. I didn't even see her. The papers were simple. Separation agreement, signed. Asset division, affirmed. Business equity, retained. Legal protections, secured. The letter I'd included with the documents was brief, but final. I didn't need to argue with her version of the past. I just needed to close the door she insisted was a cage, and let her walk out of it, empty-handed and uninterrupted. I got confirmation the next morning from my attorney. Everything was finalized. No appeals. No counters. Her signature was clean, almost elegant. Like she was trying to make it look graceful. But grace, in the end, isn't about how softly you exit. It's about what you leave behind, and what you try to take with you. She left her version of strength on paper. I kept mine in silence. That weekend I sat on the back deck with a bottle of decent scotch and the company of still air. The garden she used to complain about had grown wild since she left. Ivy climbed the back fence. The wind moved through it like it had somewhere else to be. I didn't feel relief. I felt stillness. And in that stillness, something new started to bloom. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. It's funny. She used to say that she felt invisible in the marriage. That I was too focused on success, on progress, on providing. She never saw that all of it was for both of us, that every late night, every exhausted morning, was me trying to make a foundation she could feel proud of. She wanted more. So I gave her what she asked for: space, separation, freedom. But when she finally stepped out into the open air, she realized freedom isn't the same as security. And space feels colder when no one's footing the heat. That wasn't cruelty. That was clarity. When you declare your world a cage, you better be ready to fly. And if you're not, you end up grounded. I left the door open. She walked out. And this time, I didn't close it behind her. She tried to keep the narrative alive after the paperwork settled. Not with legal filings, those were done. But with subtle whispers, repackaged insights, curated sadness, little things. A photo of her walking alone on a hiking trail with a caption about finding stillness. A post about choosing yourself even when it costs you everything. But the comments were thin. A few, stay strong, notes from fringe acquaintances. The mutuals didn't bite. Not out of hostility, just exhaustion. Most of them had watched the slow fade happen up close. They knew who funded the weekends away, the charity galas, the art workshops. They'd seen her detach over wine and wander off mid-conversation. No one said it out loud, but everyone had felt it. She stopped being a partner long before she stopped being a wife. The ones who stayed quiet longest were the ones she'd leaned on most. The women from her yoga circle, her so-called tribe. They didn't condemn her, but they stopped resharing her posts. Stopped inviting her to wellness retreats. Disengaged, not dramatically, just decisively. When narrative fatigue sets in, even loyalty wears thin. She called one of our oldest mutual friends, Matt, from her college days. I know because he told me. We'd stayed close after all this, something I hadn't expected but appreciated. She asked if I thought you'd ever forgive her, he said over bourbon one night. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the glass between us. Then I said, "Forgiveness isn't the issue. Understanding is." Matt nodded. "She's still rewriting the story, man." I already knew. I'd stopped reacting because I no longer needed the truth to be defended. It simply stood, intact, unshaken, documented. There's a certain calm that comes from knowing you don't have to yell when the facts are louder. After that, she stopped reaching out to mutuals altogether. It was a quiet surrender. A recognition that the emotional leverage she'd counted on wasn't producing returns. She said marriage was a cage. But the truth? She wanted all the benefits of connection with none of the boundaries of commitment. Freedom without structure. Love without labor. Comfort without contribution. When it came time to pay for the lifestyle, she looked around for someone else to invoice. And when she realized the only name left on the checkbook was mine, she pivoted to poetry and hashtags. I didn't clap back. I didn't clarify. I just lived. Because the best rebuttal to performance is presence. And I was still here. Still standing. Still free. Freedom looks different when you earn it. After the dust settled, I began the quiet rebuild, not of property or finances, but of self. Not dramatic. No sudden reinventions. Just steadiness. A recalibration of space, routine, and thought. It wasn't about healing fast. It was about healing honestly. I started getting up earlier, not because I had to, but because I could. The house felt different in the morning without her late alarms, her espresso machine steaming over some podcast about abundance. I cooked my own breakfasts again. Small, clean things. Eggs, toast, coffee. No acai bowls. No supplements stacked in the corner. I donated the furniture she'd picked. Not out of spite, just necessity. The couch, she said, reflected us? It didn't. It reflected her curated tastes, bought on my dime. I replaced it with something simpler. Functional. Mine. I reconnected with people I hadn't had time for when I was funding her piece. Old friends. A few colleagues I'd grown distant from. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't need to. They just said, "Good to see you again." And it meant something. One night, I came home from dinner with an old friend and realized something strange. I wasn't checking my phone. No mental inventory of what mood she might be in. No wondering if she'd be home or staying with a friend. The silence didn't feel like tension anymore. It felt like room. That was the shift. I stopped waiting for her return, not because she wouldn't, but because I didn't want her to. Not this version. Not the one who planned her exit like a strategy deck and forgot to pack accountability. She once told me that marriage had made her small. But I looked around at what she'd left behind, and saw no evidence of that. The truth? She hadn't shrunk. She just didn't grow. And now, standing in a life she no longer shaped, I realized I finally was. Not out of bitterness, not in revenge. Just in motion. Forward. Somewhere in the 4th month, I realized I no longer expected the sound of her keys. It wasn't a dramatic moment. Just a subtle realization that my body didn't flinch when the front gate clicked. That I wasn't mentally preparing a neutral expression every time the door opened. Her absence had become my rhythm. What remained were echoes, faint, harmless, dissolving. There were still traces of her, of course. A scarf in the coat closet. A half-empty journal she'd forgotten in the bottom drawer of the study. I opened it once. The last entry was dated a week before she left. A page of affirmations. Words like alignment, authenticity, release. But no ownership. No reflection. Just self-styled empowerment, curated for no one but herself. I didn't throw it out. I didn't need to. It wasn't power anymore. Just paper. A few weeks later, I got an email from her. Not emotional. Just practical. She needed a copy of the final paperwork for her accountant. I forwarded it without commentary. She replied with one sentence. "Thank you for being civil." Civil. That's the word she chose. As if I'd done her a favor by not retaliating. As if control wasn't the discipline I built when everything in me wanted to scream. But that was always the difference between us. She mistook silence for surrender. I knew it as strategy. I didn't respond. She didn't follow up. It was done. And in the stillness that followed, I started doing the one thing I hadn't done in years. Dreaming again. Not about someone new. About myself. About what life could look like without walking on eggshells while someone rebranded detachment as discovery. I went back to hiking. To reading in silence. To cooking meals that didn't need to be photogenic. I stopped explaining my plans. I stopped shrinking my ambition to make someone else feel big. And slowly, without ceremony, the weight she left behind turned into space. And space? That became strength.